to Talk to Internal Audit, our dedicated Facebook Live series. Today's session is about internal audit planning, and I will be joined by Sarah I. James and Heidi Dainton. Sarah is the interviewer for today, and Sarah has a PhD, is a CIA, and the owner of Getting Words to Work. She's also an internal auditor, writer, and editor, and delivers tailored report writing training to internal auditors and other teams across the globe, and has done since 2006. Sarah is currently working on a book on report writing, so look out for that next year. Heidi is audit director at OneSavings Bank, where she has worked for the last 2 years. Over the last 27 years of experience across internal audit and operations in both financial services and non-financial services environments. Her career highlight was that she was program manager overseeing the repurposing of a P&O cruise ship and building the new brand, which took Americans into Cuba for the first time in 55 years. And she was on that inaugural voyage. So we have some illustrious guests with us today. Today's session builds on a blog post that Heidi wrote for the Chartered IIA in December 2020. The blog post looked at how one internal audit function, Heidi's, tackled 3 key questions. What is required, no matter what happens? Where is there wiggle room? And if plans change, does this mean internal audit's opinion and assurance are somehow qualified or reduced? A link to that blog can be found in the video comments sections. So grab a drink, tea, coffee, water, and join me as we delve into internal audit planning. So a quick introduction, if I may. I'm Liz Sandwith, and I'm the Chief Professional Practices Advisor for the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors UK and Ireland. The Chartered Institute is the only professional body dedicated exclusively to training, supporting, and representing internal auditors in the UK and Ireland. We have approximately 10,000 members in all sectors of the economy, all parts of the UK and Ireland. Members are part of a global network of over 200,000 members across 170 countries, and we all work to the same international standards and code of ethics. May I also remind you that you can acquire CPE points for these Talk to Internal Audit sessions, so don't forget to log them using our CPE template. Details of how to claim CPE from this live stream can be found in the comments section. So today's topic. Today, we're looking at internal audit planning. And because of the presence of Heidi, who's going to be answering questions from Sarah, it's going to be a very practical, hands-on session. So lots to learn and lots to reflect on afterwards. For most internal audit functions, as I'm sure you are all aware, 2020 has been a challenging year. Throughout it all, internal audit plans, both strategic, annual, and engagement, have had to adapt rapidly. Change has come not just from the external environment, but also from unanticipated stakeholder requests, maybe even demands, alongside some internal auditors from within the internal audit team being redeployed and furloughed. Remember, if you like Facebook streams and want to spread the word, and I'm sure you do, be sure to share today's live stream, and you can do that by clicking the share button in the corner of your screen. After all, the more the merrier. So may I just remind you, if you're just joining us, Welcome to our live stream, Talk to Internal Audit. Today's session is about internal audit planning with Sarah I. James and Heidi Dainton. But before I introduce our speakers for today, may I just remind you of the IIA standards that relate to internal audit planning. Standard 2010 planning. The Chief Audit Exec must establish a risk-based plan to determine the priorities of the internal audit activity, consistent with the organisation's goals. 2200, engagement planning. Internal auditors must develop and document a plan for each engagement, including the engagement's objectives, scope, timing, and resource allocation. The plan must consider the organisation's strategies, objectives, and risks relevant to the engagement. And don't also forget the core principles. Core principle 4, alignment with the strategies, objectives, and risks of the organisation. To guide the internal audit activity, the Chief Audit Exec aligns the internal audit activity strategy with that of the organisation and establishes a strategic plan with a defined vision, objectives, and clear measures of success. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with those, but that's the theory, if you like. So let's really start to delve into the practical. So without further ado, please may I welcome Sarah as our interviewer and Heidi as our interviewee. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Liz. And Heidi, tell us, you provided a case study on this topic for the Chartered Institute's Technical Guidance blog. However, your organization wasn't just dealing with rapid changes imposed by the pandemic. You were also in the midst of a major merger and restructuring. Can you tell us a bit more about the background?
Yes, of course, and thank you, Sarah. So I work for OneSavings Bank, which is a challenger bank and a specialist mortgage lender. OneSavings Bank merged with Charter Corp Financial Services, two very similar sized businesses, in October 2019. Day one wasn't a massive change. They were two well-run businesses, but there was obviously some consolidation of the executive layer over the next couple of months. And more importantly, that's starting to think about how do you marry those two businesses together? How do we get the synergies that we want across the businesses? And although it was two very similar cultures, I don't think you should ever underestimate when you're doing a merger, people are anxious. What does this mean for me? What's going to happen? So we were very mindful of not just thinking about the strategy of where the two businesses were going, but also about just watching that culture and thinking about what is this meaning for people? Where are they? How are they feeling? So all of this was going on. And then, of course, we had the pandemic as well. I should say for our internal audit team, Charter Corp that we merged with had outsourced its internal audit team. So we suddenly got double the amount of work with no extra staff. Now that has positives and negatives because we didn't have to merge the two teams together, but it did mean we had a lot more work to do with the same amount of staff. So we had to up our co-source and adapt accordingly. I will say though, now a year on since the pandemic, I think my reflection is actually it's helped us with our combination, because bringing the two teams together with a common purpose of getting through the pandemic, all being at home individually, that's almost given us a level playing field and helped us with some of that culture. So I think that's a real positive coming out of the pandemic.
That's really interesting. You've raised several points there. Just also looking back, what did you identify early on as, in the midst of all this, non-negotiable areas that the internal audit function had to still cover?
So that's a really good question. And I'd like to take that in two parts if I can, one around the merger and then around the pandemic. So if we talk first of all about the merger, it was really interesting because it was new to us, but very early on, and I think this is critical for whatever we do. It's not new to everyone else. So we talked very quickly to our network, to our co-source partners, basically asked and read up on documentation, asked everyone, how have you done this? What have you done? What was non-negotiable for you? So leveraging that information was absolutely fundamental. The other thing that I think is always important when you're doing something new or going through change is to make sure you're involving your audit committee early on. So we were talking to them right at the start about what are we thinking, how are we going to approach this so that they're involved and engaged. The non-negotiable areas for us, we definitely wanted to make sure that the governance and controls were in place for that day one readiness, so setting that combination up for success. And then going forward, we wanted to make sure that the governance, risk management and controls over the integration programme were in place, so looking at that on an ongoing basis. It's more complex when you look at the work streams, the individual work streams, which we had 15 to 17 going on. There we would look at what are the risks of those work streams, and also what are the second line doing? What else, what other assurance is happening over those work stream activities? And then we might do something in flight, or we might do something as part of our normal business activity, depending on both of those things. But again, to your question about what was non-negotiable, from talking to others and our own experience, if there was any material data transfer, that was a non-negotiable. We knew we wanted to be involved in that in flight to confirm that the data was going to move securely, safely and accurately and completely. So that was something that we would drop down and do more work in flight. And then if I move on to just talk about the combination, the pandemic, sorry. So initially when the pandemic happened, we knew we couldn't continue just doing audits in a vacuum. That was the wrong answer. So, and we knew we had to understand what was the business doing in response? How was it reacting to the risks? So we paused our audit plan because the business was not in a position at the start of the pandemic to cope with us auditing while they responded to the change in the pandemic. We obviously let the audit chair know that immediately, and we dropped down into those daily crisis meetings so we could understand what was going on, what was the business doing, and also just challenging them on where they're thinking about everything. That probably was only a week to 2 weeks, honestly, before actually people stabilised to a new working norm. And we were able to start the audits, resume the audits again, where the teams weren't so impacted by the pandemic. So, you know, an area like collections that had payment holidays hitting them, that was not where we were going to continue auditing at that point. But there were areas where people were able to respond and actually continue having audits performed. So we could continue with that. However, more importantly, we needed to also understand and ensure that the right approach was being taken over the pandemic. So to do that, we actually set up 3 lines meetings, weekly meetings, where we brought together all of the assurance across the business, and we'd ask them, you know, what's going on, what are the emerging risks, what are the risk acceptances, what are the risks incidents, are you doing anything differently, have you stopped doing anything? So we were constantly getting that holistic picture so we could understand, is everything being covered? If it wasn't, we'd really push the second line to say, actually, can you do more here? So we didn't actually do audits ourselves. We were pushing the second line to make sure that they were getting the coverage or the QA functions, so we could keep that holistic view of all that was going on. But that's not to be underestimated. That was, I see us like a swan. We were graceful at the top, but busy paddling underneath to keep on top of everything that was going on. We did attend daily calls on payment holidays because that was so fast moving. We wanted to make sure real time we were challenging if there was anything that was giving us concern around the controls. So that was really important. And then if we step back, we were at a point where we had the annual audit planning cycle coming up. And it just didn't make sense to do the traditional audit plan. I mean, we knew the 40 audits that we needed to do the next year, probably straight away. But obviously we did want to make sure that we could stand behind what we were going to do, and it made sense. So we talked to the audit committee about changing our approach, and we explained that we wanted to do more a top-down agile approach, because actually the one thing that was happening in the pandemic is things were changing, and it made sense to be more agile and be able to add things and take things away. So we also talked to them about changing our audit plan. Does that make sense, Sarah?
That's fantastic. That's just so useful, and you've raised so many important points and I think useful suggestions for listeners and viewers. Speaking of which, if you are just joining us, welcome to our live stream, Talk to Internal Audit. Today's session is about internal audit planning, a practical hands-on session with me, Sarah I. James, and our guest speaker, Heidi Dainton. I've just this moment asked Heidi about a blog post she wrote for the Chartered IIA in December 2020 on adapting the audit plan in turbulent times. And we'll now move on to some other questions. So Heidi, tell us even more. How did you communicate those changes to annual or even engagement plans to the audit committee in the first line? And were there any people you had to work harder to win over or persuade? And how did you do that?
Yes, of course. So I think what was important was we were really transparent with the audit committee. So we explained to them that we were taking a different approach. We talked to them collectively and individually to make sure they were bought into what we were doing. We gave them an overview of that before we went ahead and do it. I think I mentioned we knew probably 40 audits we had to do in 2021, be that because of emerging risks, you know, cybersecurity, operational resilience, customer vulnerability. We have mandated audits that we have to do, such as responsible lending. And then also, we were still very much going for an integration. So there was a large amount of audits that were needed to address that integration change agenda. So it was a very full audit plan. So we didn't do the bottom-up assessment. We didn't feel that was the right thing to do at a time when we needed to be challenging the business on what was going on. It didn't feel the right thing to be doing, to spend, you know, 2-3 weeks going through bottom up what was going on. So we took a top-down assessment. Now, that still means we absolutely engaged with our executives, with our stakeholders. We looked at what was going on, horizon scanning out in the audit trends. We're looking at what are the risks at the business, what's the objectives of the business. So we're still considering all of that as we are on an ongoing basis, honestly. But we still challenged ourselves around what were we doing. But again, when we came back to the audit committee, we were very transparent. We were very clear on what we had and hadn't done on compiling the plan. We were explicit on what areas of the universe we were covering and weren't covering, because there was so much on there. There were still quite important areas that we couldn't do, and it was really important we were transparent with that. And also there were areas that we weren't covering, be that because we felt there was another assurance function doing it, so actually we could spread our coverage and didn't need to also cover that, or because management was fixing something. And I think that's really important. You must never underestimate that the audit committee needs to be reminded of all of that, because otherwise they'll just think, oh, you must be covering that. So we were very clear on what we were and weren't doing and why. And actually, more importantly, those areas that we hadn't done for 3 years, but we weren't going to do them again in 2021 because the areas we were doing were more critical. We were transparent about that as well. So you asked me a question around where we perhaps faced the biggest challenge, or where did we get the biggest pushback on what we were doing? Who was hardest to win over? And I think generally we were hardest to win over. it's easier to almost do what you know already. You know that it works. Being brave and actually doing something different, and as auditors perhaps having a bit less paperwork to support it, that's scary. And so we kept challenging ourselves. Could we stand behind that plan? But we can, and we continue to stand behind that plan. And I think it's about doing the right thing, but making sure that you've got to the right answer and you've given yourself enough challenge. And so we should evolve as we expect the business to evolve as things change. And hopefully that's what we've demonstrated we've done. But it was almost harder to do that than do the same thing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, I was thinking you could come up with a country music cover, but call it Stand By Your Plan.
But it is a plan. It is a plan.
It is a plan, and it has to adapt and be flexible, as you've demonstrated. So what do you think will now be part of your business as usual, if such a thing exists anymore, approach to planning as a result of business being anything but usual last year? What are your thoughts on that, Heidi?
So it's a really great question. One of the things that I think has worked really well is we've continued to perform quarterly risk assessments, being more fluid, adding things into the plan, taking things out. Now, interestingly, we're probably only adding in 1 to 2 reviews, but the benefit of that constant challenging yourself, what's going on in the business, what are we seeing from risks, what are we hearing in the industry, is actually the conversation that we're having as a team and the richness that that's adding in to some of the existing audits we've actually got on the plan, and as well as thinking about new things and ensuring that the whole team has a holistic understanding of what's going on, which they can take in to those individual part audits that they're doing. And I actually think that's been a really great investment in the team that's come from the quarterly reviews. We're actually now hitting what would be our normal annual planning cycle. And we can't do what we did last year, and we don't want to do what we did the year before. And so we're working through what makes sense for this year. I think it's probably a bit of a hybrid of the two. I want to leverage those quarterly reviews and then just make sure we do a little bit more about how we really covered the universe. What are those areas that we need to think about that we haven't looked at for a little while? Make sure I've got that completeness in there. But it continues to evolve, and we're continuing to navigate what now makes sense as a risk-based plan in this new norm. But maybe I could come back and tell you when we figure it out completely what it looks like. I mean, I suppose I smile, but I think if I reflect on where we are, I think the greatest things that we've done is we've really challenged ourselves on what do you need to be doing annually and what should you be doing on an ongoing basis to really make sure that your plan remains risk-based, current, really addressing what it needs to be from the business. So that's been, I think, a really important step change for us in discipline. Again, the other thing is that when there was so many risks going on, really leveraging the other assurance of functions, making sure you understand holistically what all assurance is happening across the business, so that you don't duplicate that, but also it informs your opinion, it informs what you're thinking of doing. Are there themes going on there that then changes what you should be looking at? So I would say leverage all the assurance you can to provide your insight, continue to look at risk on an ongoing basis, and just step back and challenge yourself. Is everything you're doing really adding value, and is it moving the dial? And if it isn't, do you keep doing it?
That's a fantastic image that you use, moving the dial, and you've given us so much to think about. So thank you very much, Heidi, and reluctantly hand back to Liz now.
Thank you very much, ladies. Fascinating story, Heidi, from you around what OneSavings Bank has been doing and the challenges that you have faced. So before I come into the conclusion, may I just say, if you're just joining us, welcome to our live stream, Talk to Internal Audit. Today's session is about internal audit planning, and we've had a very much practical, hands-on session with our guest speakers, Sarah I. James and Heidi Dainton. And Heidi in particular has spoken about a very practical example at her employer at OneSavings Bank, and we're going to give you details of the blog that she wrote for us in December 2020. That's going to be in the comments section, so please look for that before you leave. May I say a huge thank you to Sarah and Heidi for joining me today and for sharing their thoughts with us. Lots for all of us to reflect upon, and perhaps you could share this video with your colleagues, and particularly refer to it when you are starting to think about your internal audit plan for maybe next year, or want to benchmark or reflect on your current plan and listen to some of what Heidi has been saying. The live stream is available afterwards for those of your friends or colleagues who may have missed the live version or the live stream on the Institute's Facebook channel. Please follow all of the exciting things the Institute is doing on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. As a member of the Institute, you of course have access to the latest edition of our Audit and Risk magazine, which is available on our website. And welcome to the latest digital edition of Audit and Risk magazine. So we're looking at all things digital in the current edition. The last 14 months have shown us how we can transform rapidly in a crisis. So wind the clock back, who would have thought within a week, 10 days at the most organizations would have their entire workforce working from home using laptops. It would have been considered, prior to the scenario we found ourselves in, almost impossible. And we must build on how we dealt with that, how we faced that challenge to meet all of the challenges ahead. The pandemic is not the only factor significantly changing the way we do business. The government's consultation on audit reform and the imperative to boost confidence in business and the UK economy post-Brexit are also clear indications that further developments are in the pipeline. Whilst all organisations have been through a turbulent year, we cannot take our eye off the ball now or expect the pace of change to slow in the near future. So highlights in the magazine include the Audit and Risk Awards shortlist, the benefits of collaboration, and an opportunity to meet the new IIA Global CEO and President. The Audit and Risk Awards recognise the high standards of quality and integrity vital to the success of internal audit, as well as reward the innovation delivered by teams and individuals who are at the cutting edge of their profession. We've just announced the shortlist of the Audit and Risk Awards. So now you know who has been shortlisted. Why don't you join us on the 25th of June and be there when the winners are announced? Book your place at this year's awards ceremony that's taking place online and is free. So please join us and you can celebrate with the winners. Because we've been talking today about internal audit planning, I'd just like to refer you to a training course we have on audit planning, latest requirements and good practices. The audit plan should not just be about the plan itself, it's also a key opportunity to strengthen relationships with key stakeholders. In addition, an audit strategy can set the stage for many of the things the internal audit function does and how it's perceived. Details of how to book this course can be found in the comments section of the video. So please have a look and reflect on whether that might be appropriate to you or a colleague. In case you've not already checked it out, the Institute now has a brand new community hub for all of you to get involved in. A new gateway to all community-focused activities and endeavours, including our virtual forums, Heads of Internal Audit Forum, Local Authority Forum, our regional network. All of our regions run events across the year, and we are still in Internal Audit Without Borders, so you can join and sign up for any and all events and opportunities to volunteer. You'll find a list of our special interest groups, or if there are any that pique your interest, you can reach out to them. So things like a retail audit forum, a construction industry forum, all of those things that are there and available for you. Our community hub is open to all, members and non-members, and draws on our learnings from the COVID-19 period. So watch the community hub as it continues to take shape over the coming months. As we move forward into the new future, please don't forget to look out for Talk to Internal Audit. All of the live streams we did in 2020 can be found on our new YouTube channel. So if you haven't yet watched any, be sure to subscribe. A link to our YouTube channel can be found in the comments section. I'm sure you're appreciating now that comment section is going to get quite busy. So make sure you've got a pen and paper or an ability to detail all of the things that I've just told you are going to be there. We will continue to share our thoughts regarding specific challenges, along with input from colleagues, members and guests, so stay in touch. We have 2 Talk to Internal Audit sessions in June, which will focus on financial stability and on auditing the supply chain. Both key challenges for organisations and for internal auditors as we move forward into the next phase of the new norm, which, as Sarah says, we don't yet know what that's quite going to look like. So look out for them and please join us. I'd also draw your attention to the BEIS white paper that's recently been issued on restoring trust in audit and corporate governance. It's out for consultation. It's a lengthy document, but it's readily available on the internet if you want to have a look at it. The Institute will, of course, be doing a response to the consultation, and we will be sharing with our members our thoughts around what our consultation should look like. And we would welcome your thoughts. So if you get the opportunity to respond, then please do. It's really important, particularly thinking about the future of our profession. If you have any specific topics you would like us to cover, please share your thoughts in the comments box. I'm always happy to take questions, as you know by now, so please don't hesitate to email me at liz.sandwith@iia.org.uk. Remember, talk to Internal Audit. The Institute is listening. Please take care, stay safe, and have a great week, month, whatever. Thank you.